This is a story from my life, something that happened to me, and it's taken me a long time to be able to talk about it. It's not easy to admit how blind you were, but sometimes seeing the truth is worth the pain. The weight of the antique brass key in my hand felt wrong, too heavy, like a small, cold anchor. We were standing in the middle of our suite at the Hotel de Russie in Rome, the afternoon sun slanting through the tall windows and painting stripes across the marble floor. It was supposed to be the pinnacle of our 10-year anniversary trip, the grand finale. But as Marcus frantically patted his pockets for the third time, his carefully constructed mask of concern slipping just enough for me to see the flicker of something else in his eyes. I saw his message flash on his watch screen. It's done. She's not going anywhere. See you Friday. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The trip had been his idea, a surprise he'd unveiled over a celebratory dinner at Gary Danko in San Francisco a few months prior. "A decade, Elena," he'd said, his voice smooth as the aged port in his glass. "We deserve to celebrate it properly. Paris, then Rome, just the two of us. No work, no distractions." Marcus was a master of grand gestures. He was a partner at a boutique private equity firm, a world of sleek glass offices in the financial district, hushed phone calls, and deals that were spoken of in nine-figure terms. Our life was curated, beautiful, and expensive. We lived in a meticulously restored Victorian in Pacific Heights, with views of the Golden Gate Bridge that made your heart ache. He had designed our life, and I, a moderately successful freelance architect, had been a willing and grateful resident within it. I loved him. I think it's important to state that plainly. It wasn't a love born of convenience or wealth. It was a deep, foundational love that had started in college, built over late-night study sessions, cheap pizza, and shared dreams of a future that looked nothing like the one we now inhabited. I had loved the brilliant, ambitious boy with more drive than sense, and I still saw him inside the polished, impeccably dressed man who now held my life in his hands. But over the years, his ambition had calcified into something harder, more controlling. He'd started helping with my client proposals, suggesting I turn down smaller, more creative projects in favor of lucrative but soulless corporate renovations. He managed our finances, a complex web of investments and accounts that he assured me were too boring for me to worry about. I'd let him. It was easier. It was part of the perfect picture he was painting, and I was the final, elegant brushstroke. The red flags were there, of course. They always are. Little things. The way he'd subtly steer conversations away from my friends, particularly my sister Jessica, a fiercely independent lawyer who saw Marcus not as a Prince Charming, but as a gilded cage. The time I'd found a receipt for a ridiculously expensive necklace from Tiffany's that I never received, which he'd brushed off as a gift for a client's wife. "It's just how business is done at this level, Ellie," he'd said, his tone making me feel naive and provincial. I'd believed him. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. The trip to Rome was meant to be the antidote to the creeping unease I'd started to feel. A grand romantic gesture to paper over the hairline cracks in our foundation. "I just don't understand it," Marcus was saying now, his voice a performance of bewildered frustration. He was pulling cushions off the brocade sofa, running his hands under the edges of the Persian rug. "I had it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I always keep our passports together. Our passports." The lie was so effortless. My passport was missing. His, I knew with a sudden, chilling certainty, was exactly where he'd left it. We were just at the Spanish Steps. Maybe it fell out there. Someone could have picked my pocket. He looked at me, his blue eyes wide with faux panic. "My God, Ellie, your passport!" My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. But on the outside, I mirrored his panic. It was a primal instinct, a survival mechanism kicking in. Don't let him know you know. "My passport? Marcus, are you serious?" I let my voice crack. I sank onto the edge of the bed, putting my head in my hands. The message on his watch burned behind my eyelids. It's done. She's not going anywhere. See you Friday. Our flight home was on Thursday. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was trying to strand me in a foreign country, to dispose of me while he moved on to someone new. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it was like a physical blow. Who was he seeing on Friday? And why go to such elaborate, sociopathic lengths? A simple breakup was too mundane for a man like Marcus. He needed a narrative he could control. The hysterical, careless wife who lost her passport and had a meltdown, forcing him to leave her behind while he regretfully returned to his important life. He was already writing the script. Okay, don't panic, he said, kneeling in front of me, taking my hands. His touch felt like ice. We'll figure this out. We'll call the embassy first thing in the morning. I'll handle everything. You try to relax. He was soothing the victim while savoring the victory. The smugness was there, lurking just beneath the surface of his manufactured concern. He thought he had me. A distressed damsel in a foreign land, completely dependent on him. He had my credit cards, our joint bank accounts, everything. He had built my gilded cage, and now he had locked the door and thrown away the key. He had underestimated me. He had forgotten the girl who'd clawed her way through architecture school on scholarships and sheer grit. He saw the polished wife he'd created, not the woman who had built her own foundations long before he came along. As he stood up to make a great show of searching his luggage one last time, my mind was already working, the gears grinding past the shock and into the cold, clear realm of strategy. The game wasn't over. He had just made the first move. And I was about to change all the rules. The first night was an exercise in masterful acting. I let myself be fragile, allowing him to cosset me. He ordered room service from the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant, La Jardin de Russie, choosing all my favorites. He poured me a glass of Brunello, his thumb stroking the back of my hand, as he assured me everything would be all right. It's just a bureaucratic headache, honey. We'll get you a temporary passport. It might just take a few days. I might have to fly back on Thursday as planned. I have that final meeting on the Atherton deal. It's the biggest of my career, but I'll get you on the first flight out after that. I promise. The lie was so perfectly constructed, seeded with just enough truth to be plausible. The Atherton deal was real. I'd heard him on the phone for weeks, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and stress. It was a massive merger he was orchestrating, one that would cement his legacy at the firm. And he was using it as an alibi. I nodded, pretending to be overwhelmed, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted like ash. Whatever you think is best, Marcus. I just feel so stupid. I let a tear slide down my cheek, and the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. He was eating it up. While he showered, I made my first move. I used my laptop, connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi, and opened a secure, encrypted email account. A throwaway one he knew nothing about. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was solidifying. My first email was to my sister, Jessica. The subject line was, Code Red, Urgent. The body of the email was short and to the point. Marcus sabotaged my passport in Rome. Stranded. Don't reply to this email. Don't call my phone. He's monitoring everything. Create a new secure chat account and send me the login details to this address. I need your help. This is war. The next morning, Marcus was the picture of efficiency. He was on the phone in crisp Italian, talking to the concierge, getting the address and hours for the U.S. Embassy on Via Vittorio Veneto. See? We're already on it, he said, turning to me with a reassuring smile. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. He was going to walk me to the embassy, play the part of the concerned husband, and then leave me to drown in a sea of red tape he knew would take days, if not weeks, to navigate. He was counting on my helplessness. At the embassy, it was exactly as he'd predicted. A bureaucratic labyrinth, forms in triplicate, long lines, and the weary expression of an official who told me that without a police report and the original supporting documents, all of which were conveniently in our safe back in San Francisco, issuing An emergency passport would be a lengthy process. Marcus stood beside me, oozing sympathy. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said to the official, squeezing my shoulder. He was an artist, and this was his masterpiece. As we left, stepping back out into the brilliant Roman sunshine, he delivered the next blow. "Ellie, listen. I've been thinking. It's probably best if I handle the finances from my end for now. With the passport missing, we can't risk your identity being stolen. I'm going to call the credit card companies and just put a temporary freeze on your cards, purely as a precaution." It was so slick, so perfectly logical, and so utterly devastating. He was cutting my financial lifeline. He was leaving me with nothing but the few €100 in my wallet. "Okay, Marcus," I said, my voice a whisper. "If you think that's what's best." He smiled, relieved that I was being so compliant. He hailed a taxi. "You head back to the hotel and rest. I'm going to go to the Carabinieri to file the police report. No need for both of us to wait around there." He kissed my forehead, a gesture of profound betrayal, and put me in the cab. As it pulled away, I watched him in the rearview mirror. He didn't walk in the direction of the police station. He turned the other way, pulled out his phone, and I saw his face break into a wide, triumphant smile. He thought he'd won. He had no idea I'd already declared war. Back in the hotel room, alone and untethered, a notification pinged on my laptop. A new email. It was from a nonsensical address. The login details for a secure chat. Jessica was in. Team Elena now had a second player. The first message from Jessica was a lifeline. "Ellie, are you there? I've been going out of my mind. What the hell is going on?" Typing furiously, I laid it all out. The missing passport, the message on his watch, the calculated way he was isolating and stranding me. Every detail I could remember. Her responses were clipped, furious and immediate. "That son of a bitch!" "I always knew it. Okay, stay calm. We're going to get you home, and then we're going to burn his entire world to the ground. What do you need right now?" "First, money." I told her he'd frozen my cards. Jessica was a partner at her law firm. She was practical and resourceful. "I'll wire money to you via Western Union. There's one a few blocks from your hotel. Go there first thing in the morning. Don't use an ATM. Don't leave a paper trail he can trace." Next, a way home. The embassy was a dead end without documentation. "I'll overnight a package to the hotel. Your birth certificate, social security card, a notarized copy of your driver's license. Everything you need. It'll be addressed to you, care of the concierge. He'll have no reason to be suspicious of a simple FedEx package." Finally, information. "I need to know who she is," I typed. "The one he's meeting on Friday." Jessica was already ahead of me. "Give me 24 hours. I'll start digging. Check his social media, our shared friends, everything. He's arrogant. He's slipped up somewhere. They always do." The next 2 days were a blur of clandestine activity disguised as heartbroken lethargy. I played my part to perfection. I stayed in the hotel suite, claiming to have a crushing migraine. I'd let his calls go to voicemail, then text him back an hour later saying I'd been asleep. I needed him to believe I was falling apart, retreating into myself. It gave me the space I needed to operate. He'd text me updates, feigning frustration with the police report, telling me he was pulling every string he could. In reality, I knew he was enjoying his last few days of freedom in Rome, whining and dining someone probably, before his triumphant return. The Western Union transfer was a success. I slipped out of the hotel early in the morning, clad in a headscarf and sunglasses, my heart pounding with every step. The feeling of the crisp euro notes in my hand was the feeling of taking back a small piece of my power. I wasn't penniless. I wasn't helpless. The next morning, the FedEx package arrived. I intercepted the concierge, signing for it myself and smuggling the slim envelope up to my room. Holding my own birth certificate, my own identity, felt like drawing a weapon. I now had the ammunition I needed to get my emergency passport. I booked an appointment online at the embassy for the next day, Wednesday. My flight home was scheduled for Thursday. Marcus thought I was trapped. In reality, I was a ghost, moving through the city, reassembling my life while he remained blissfully unaware. Late Tuesday night, Jessica's message came through on the secure chat. It was a single explosive sentence. I know who she is. Chloe Sterling. The name meant nothing to me. I typed back, "Who is Chloe Sterling?" The reply came a second later, and the floor dropped out from under me. She's Richard Sterling's 26-year-old sister. Richard Sterling. Your husband's business partner. The other partner on the Atherton deal. The audacity was staggering. It wasn't just an affair. It was a catastrophic breach of trust with the one man who could ruin him professionally. Richard Sterling was older, a mentor to Marcus, the steady hand at their firm. Marcus was sleeping with his much younger sister. The betrayal wasn't just against me. It was a ticking time bomb at the heart of his career. And the Atherton deal was the fuse. Jessica had done more digging. Chloe was a vapid, Instagram-obsessed trust fund kid who'd been posting story after story from Paris for the past week. Her feed was a curated stream of champagne flutes, designer bags, and Eiffel Tower backdrops. She was waiting for him. Our romantic anniversary trip had been a cover. He was supposed to meet me in Rome after his meetings in Paris, but he'd been with her the whole time. The trip was designed to get me out of San Francisco, away from our home and our life, so he could transition seamlessly from me to her. Losing my passport wasn't just about stranding me. It was about buying him time to clean up the mess at home, to move my things out, to erase me before I even knew I was being erased. My sorrow curdled into a cold, diamond-hard fury. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about a man who believed he was so powerful, so untouchable, that he could dispose of a human being, a 10-year relationship, like it was a failed business venture to be written off. He wanted to destroy my life. I would dismantle his. Jessica had found another piece of the puzzle. The celebration party for the Atherton deal is this Saturday night, she wrote. At the St. Francis, it's a huge black tie affair. The entire San Francisco financial world will be there. He's planning to announce his engagement to Chloe that night. He thinks you'll still be stuck in Rome, figuring things out. An engagement party. He was going to stand up in front of everyone who mattered and present Chloe as his prize, spinning a story of my tragic, hysterical breakdown abroad. He was going to erase me and replace me in one fell swoop. Saturday, I typed. He thinks I'll be in Rome on Saturday. A plan began to form in my mind, a dark and intricate piece of architecture. It was ambitious. It was terrifying. And it was going to be beautiful. Wednesday morning, I walked into the U.S. Embassy with my head held high. I had my documents, the police report I'd filed myself online, and a story of a stolen purse. I was calm, collected, and efficient. By 3 p.m., I had a temporary passport in my hand. It was the most beautiful document I had ever seen. I walked directly to a small travel agency and booked a one-way ticket from Rome to San Francisco, departing Thursday morning. I used the cash Jessica had wired me. There would be no electronic trail. To Marcus, and to the world, I was still the distraught wife, marooned in a luxury hotel room in Italy. I spent the rest of the day composing an email. Not to Marcus, but to Richard Sterling. I didn't send it. Not yet. It was a detailed, dispassionate account of Marcus's affair with his sister, complete with screenshots of Chloe's Paris Instagram posts, cross-referenced with Marcus's supposed business itinerary. It was devastating. But it wasn't enough. An affair could be explained away, forgiven. I needed something more. I needed a kill shot. That night, I called Marcus. I pitched my voice to sound weary and defeated. "I miss you," I said, the words feeling like poison on my tongue. "It's so lonely here without you." He lapped it up, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. "I know, baby. I'm so sorry this happened. Just hang in there. My flight is early tomorrow morning. I'll be back in SF by midday Thursday. I'll start pulling strings from that end. I promise." "Okay," I whispered. "Fly safe, Marcus." I hung up the phone and a grim smile touched my lips. My flight was also early tomorrow morning. I was going to beat him home. While Marcus was in the air, somewhere over the Atlantic, believing I was safely tucked away in Rome, I was already on the ground at SFO. The California air had never felt so good. Jessica was waiting for me at the arrivals gate, and I fell into her arms, the tension of the past few days finally breaking. We didn't cry. There was no time for that. We drove straight to her office in the Embarcadero. Her conference room became our war room. For the next 48 hours, we lived on coffee and adrenaline. He thinks he's firewalled everything, Jessica said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. But he's arrogant. And arrogance leaves holes. He had locked me out of our joint bank accounts, but he'd forgotten about the shared cloud storage where we kept digital copies of all our important documents, tax returns, mortgage agreements, investment statements. He probably assumed I never looked at it. He was wrong. I was an architect. I lived in details. We started digging, going back years. And then we found it. The smoking gun. It was in the loan application for our house. We'd bought the Pacific Heights Victorian 5 years ago. I'd put down a significant portion of the down payment myself, an inheritance from my grandmother. My name was on the deed on the mortgage. But a year ago, Marcus had taken out a second mortgage on the property, a massive line of credit for $500,000. He told me it was a strategic move to have liquid capital for a guaranteed investment opportunity. I had been hesitant, but he'd been persuasive. I'd signed the papers. Or so I thought. Jessica pulled up the digital copy of the signed loan agreement from the cloud. She zoomed in on my signature. "Elena, look at this," she said, her voice quiet. I leaned in. It was my name, but it wasn't my signature. The angle was wrong. The loop on the E was too perfect. Over 10 years, I had seen my own signature thousands of times. This was a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. He forged my signature, I breathed, the cold reality washing over me. He leveraged our home, my inheritance, without my legal consent. Jessica's face was grim. "And where did that $500,000 go?" she asked, already opening another set of files. It didn't take long to find the answer. The money hadn't gone into a joint investment account. It had been wired directly to a holding company. The same holding company Marcus was using to finance his personal stake in the Atherton merger. He hadn't just cheated on me. He hadn't just committed fraud. He had stolen from me. He had used my own money, my grandmother's legacy, to build the empire he was planning to share with his new child bride. He hadn't just tried to strand me in Rome. He had planned to leave me with nothing, saddled with a debt I hadn't even known I'd incurred. The affair was a betrayal. This was a declaration of total war. "The Atherton deal closes on Monday," Jessica said, her lawyer brain already mapping out the strategy. "The party on Saturday is a celebration of the agreement, a victory lap. If news of this fraud gets out before the ink is dry, the entire deal will collapse. The investors will run for the hills. He'll be ruined. Not just financially, criminally." I looked at the forged signature on the screen. I looked at Jessica, her eyes alight with righteous fury. The stage was set. The party on Saturday night wouldn't be his coronation. It would be his execution. And I was going to be the one to swing the axe. The next 2 days were a blur of meticulous preparation. We didn't just have a smoking gun. We built an entire arsenal around it. Jessica, with her legal expertise, helped me draft a series of communications, each one a perfectly calibrated missile aimed at the foundations of Marcus's life. First, a formal complaint to the state bar against the notary whose stamp was on the forged loan document. Second, a whistleblower report to the SEC, detailing the fraudulent leveraging of assets to secure funding for the merger, complete with bank statements showing the wire transfer. Third, a cease and desist letter to Marcus from Jessica's firm, informing him of my intent to file for divorce on the grounds of fraud and adultery, and to press criminal charges. And finally, the email to Richard Sterling. I rewrote it. It no longer just detailed the affair. It now included an addendum with irrefutable proof of the forgery and the misappropriated funds. explaining how Marcus had not only betrayed him personally by sleeping with his sister, but had also exposed their firm and the entire Atherton deal to catastrophic legal and financial risk. We scheduled everything to detonate simultaneously. The SEC report was submitted through their online portal. The other documents were attached to a series of timed emails. The email to Richard Sterling was set to be sent at 9:15 p.m. on Saturday night. The one to the board of directors of the Atherton Company at 9:20 p.m. The one to Marcus's own partners at 9:25 p.m. The party at the St. Francis Hotel started at 8 p.m. I wanted him to be at the absolute peak of his triumph, surrounded by everyone he wanted to impress, when his world came crashing down around him. The final piece of the plan was me. I couldn't just be a name on an email. I had to be there. I had to watch it happen. On Saturday afternoon, I went shopping. I didn't buy a morning dress or a power suit. I bought a knockout dress, a sheath of emerald green silk that clung in all the right places. It was the color of money and envy. I had my hair and makeup done professionally. I didn't want to look like a woman scorned. I wanted to look like the woman who owned the room. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. The last vestiges of the soft, trusting girl were gone. In her place was a woman made of ice and steel. Jessica and I arrived at the St. Francis at exactly 9 p.m. We weren't on the guest list, but a crisp $100 bill and a confident smile to the doorman got us through. The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of old money and new ambition. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. And there he was, in the center of it all, holding a glass of champagne, his arm possessively around Chloe Sterling's waist. She was beautiful in a vapid, unthreatening way, wearing a pale pink dress that made her look like a debutante at her own ball. Marcus was radiant, glowing with success. He was laughing, accepting congratulations, the king in his court. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, his gaze passed right over me without a flicker of recognition. To him, I was a ghost, a problem he'd left behind an ocean away. At 9:15, I felt my phone vibrate in my clutch. It was a confirmation email. The message to Richard Sterling had been sent. I watched him from across the room. He was standing near the bar, deep in conversation. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance on his face. He opened the message. The change was instantaneous and seismic. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a waxy, mottled gray. His hand holding the phone began to shake. His jovial mask dissolved into a rictus of pure horror. He looked up, his eyes frantically searching the room, not for me, but for his partner, for Marcus. 20. My phone buzzed again. The email to the Atherton board was sent. A few feet away from me, a portly man in a tuxedo, the CEO of the company, checked his phone. His eyebrows shot up into his hairline. He excused himself abruptly from his conversation and began walking purposefully towards his CFO, phone held out like a piece of toxic evidence. 25. The final buzz. The email to Marcus's partners. Now a ripple was spreading through the room. Phones were appearing, hushed, urgent conversations were starting. The celebratory atmosphere was rapidly curdling into one of confusion and alarm. And still, Marcus was oblivious, basking in the glow of his own ego, holding court with Chloe. Richard Sterling was now striding across the ballroom, his face a thundercloud. He didn't say a word. He walked straight up to Marcus, showed him the screen of his phone, and I saw Marcus's confident smile collapse. It didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from his face as he read the words, the blood leaving his head so fast I thought he might faint. His eyes, wide with disbelief and terror, finally lifted and scanned the room, desperately searching for an explanation, a mistake, a trick. And then he saw me. I was standing by a marble pillar, a glass of champagne in my hand, my emerald dress shimmering under the chandeliers. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I just met his gaze, my expression as cool and serene as a frozen lake. And in that moment, he knew. He knew that I wasn't in Rome. He knew that I had done this. I saw the progression of emotions on his face. Utter shock, followed by dawning comprehension, and then a wave of pure, impotent rage. He took a step towards me, his lips pulled back in a snarl, but Richard Sterling grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip. "Don't you dare!" Sterling hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You're done." Chloe was looking back and forth between them, her doll-like face a mask of confusion. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Who is that?" she asked, pointing a manicured finger at me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, holding his terrified gaze over the rim of the glass. I didn't need to say a word. The murmuring in the room was growing louder. Deals were collapsing. Reputations were evaporating. Lives were being ruined. And all I had to do was stand there and watch. The chaos was my proxy. I had built the pyre, sent the invitations, and lit the match. Now I was simply a spectator at the most satisfying bonfire I had ever witnessed. I gave him one last, tiny nod, a final, silent acknowledgement of his utter and complete annihilation. Then I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving him to be consumed by the flames. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The Atherton deal imploded in a spectacular fashion, sparking SEC investigations and a firestorm of lawsuits. Marcus was fired from his firm, his name publicly disgraced. Richard Sterling, to protect himself and what was left of his company, cooperated fully with the authorities, throwing Marcus to the wolves. He was facing multiple felony charges for fraud and forgery. His assets were frozen. He lost everything, the job, the money, the reputation. He even lost the girl. Chloe, realizing she had hitched her wagon to a falling and potentially incarcerated, Star, disappeared back into the protective custody of her family's wealth. I filed for divorce the following Monday. With the evidence of his fraud, the proceedings were laughably one-sided. I got the house, my house. I got my inheritance back, and then some. I sold the Victorian in Pacific Heights. It was a beautiful cage, but it was still a cage, and I had no intention of ever living in it again. I moved to a loft in Soma, a wide-open space with concrete floors and massive windows, a place that was entirely my own. I don't revel in what happened to him. I don't take pleasure in the destruction of a man I once loved. But I don't regret it either. He made his choices. He built his world on lies and believed he was insulated from the consequences. I simply held up a mirror and forced him to look. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I think about that moment in the hotel room in Rome, the weight of that brass key in my hand. I remember the feeling of the world tilting off its axis. He thought he was closing a door on me, locking me away in the past. He never imagined I would have the strength to not just find the key, but to burn the whole house down. He forgot that the quietest people are often the ones with the most to say, and that hell hath no fury like a woman who has been erased. The fire he started didn't just burn him. It forged me into something new, something harder and brighter than before. The end.